Have you ever imagined what life would be like if fate decides to turn its back on you? Or why some people are tested beyond their limits while others seem to have everything go their way? This is the story of Toju, a man who lost everything he loved in a single day. His journey through pain, grief, and unexpected hope is one that will shake your heart. Toju had always lived a humble and peaceful life in Kefi, a small town nestled between the serene hills and flowing rivers of central Nigeria. He had built a life here, surrounded by the laughter of his two daughters, the tender love of his wife, Ngozi, and the guiding wisdom of his aging mother, Mama Iniola. The town was small enough that everyone knew each other, and it had a charm that made the worries of the world feel distant. Toju was the proud owner of a small farm, growing crops of maize, yams, and vegetables. His wife, Ngozi, was a schoolteacher who also took care of their two children, Kayamika and Ngozi Jr. Though they had little in terms of material wealth, they had everything that mattered: love, happiness, and family. Ngozi was pregnant with their third child, a baby boy. The anticipation of welcoming a new life filled the home with excitement. Toju and Ngozi would often talk late into the night about their hopes for the future. They dreamed of building a bigger home for their growing family and sending their children to school so they could become educated and successful. Mama Iniola, despite her frail health, always sat by the door, watching over her family with a smile. She often told Toju stories about the old days, tales of their ancestors, and the spiritual connections that bound the family together. Toju loved her stories, though he was often too busy with work to appreciate their deeper meanings. But fate had a different plan for Toju and his family, one he could never have predicted. It was a sunny morning when everything began to change. Ngozi had been feeling unwell the night before, but she dismissed it as nothing serious. However, by the time the sun rose, her contractions had started, and it quickly became clear that something was wrong. Toju, filled with panic, rushed her to the hospital, hoping that the skilled doctors could help her through the labor. At the hospital, Ngozi's labor became increasingly complicated. The doctors worked frantically, trying to stabilize both her and the baby. Toju was beside himself, pacing in the waiting area, praying for a miracle. The hours stretched on, and soon, he was told that the situation was dire. The doctors couldn't save the baby. They tried to revive Ngozi, but the complications were too much for her frail body. She passed away, leaving Toju completely shattered. The news hit him like a thunderbolt. His heart felt as though it had been ripped from his chest. He sat in the hospital room, holding his wife's cold hand, unable to comprehend that she was truly gone. The joy of welcoming a child had turned into the most devastating day of his life. When Toju returned home to break the news to his mother, he found her in the sitting room, sipping tea. Upon hearing the dreadful news of her daughter-in-law's death, Mama Iniola's face turned pale. She stood up, trembling, and clutched her chest, the shock overwhelming her frail heart. She collapsed to the floor and fell into a coma, unable to wake. Toju called the doctors again, but they told him it was a matter of time before she would pass away. Before Toju could even process his mother's condition, tragedy struck once more. In the midst of his sorrow, a phone call came. His two daughters, Kayamika and Ngozi Jr., had been involved in a terrible car accident while returning from school. Toju rushed to the scene, but by the time he arrived, both girls were already gone. The car they had been in had collided with a speeding truck, and the impact was fatal. Toju stood at the crash site, staring in disbelief. His children, his flesh and blood, were gone. He had no strength left in him to cry, no tears to shed. His entire world had collapsed, and there was nothing left to hold on to. The days following the deaths of his family were a blur. Toju barely ate or slept. His life had lost all meaning. The pain of losing his wife, his children, and his mother was unbearable. It felt as though the world had come to a stop, leaving him stranded in a dark, endless void. His friends and neighbors tried to comfort him, but their words felt hollow. They told him to be strong, to move on, but how could he? How could anyone move on after losing everything they held dear in one day? The thought of never seeing Ngozi smile, never hearing his daughter's laugh, or holding his mother's hand again, was more than he could bear. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Toju isolated himself from the world. He stopped working on his farm and refused to talk to anyone. His grief consumed him entirely. He would often wander the town, numb, walking aimlessly for hours, not knowing where he was going. At night, he would lie awake in bed, staring at the empty space beside him. The pain was so intense that it felt physical, as though his heart had been ripped apart and left to bleed. He couldn't understand why life had been so cruel, why fate had taken everything from him in a single, devastating blow. One evening, after weeks of silence, a woman approached Toju. She was an elderly woman, dressed in traditional clothes, with a kind face that seemed to radiate warmth. Toju had seen her around town before, but they had never spoken. She told him that she had heard of his tragedy and wanted to share something with him. "Son," the woman said softly, "I know you are hurting. I know the weight of your grief, but I want to remind you of something important. The pain you are feeling is not the end of your story. It is just a chapter. Life may have taken everything from you, but it has also given you a chance to rebuild." Toju listened, unsure of what to make of her words. The woman handed him a small, carved wooden charm. "This is for you," she said. "It is a gift from the ancestors. Carry it with you, and it will help guide you through your pain." Toju didn't understand what the charm was supposed to mean, but something in the woman's voice made him take it. He put it in his pocket, unsure if it would do anything to ease his sorrow. Over the next few weeks, Toju began to notice small changes within himself. The charm seemed to serve as a reminder that, despite the overwhelming darkness, he still had the strength to live. Slowly, he started to return to the farm, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to do something, anything, to feel alive again. It wasn't much at first, just tending to a few crops, but it was a start. He also began visiting the graves of his family members. At first, he would just sit there, staring at the tombstones, unable to speak. But one day, as he sat in front of his wife's grave, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He could almost feel her presence, as though she were there, smiling at him. Her love, he realized, was still with him. It would never truly leave. Toju began to find solace in the simple things, the sound of birds singing, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the feel of the earth beneath his hands. Slowly, he started to rebuild his life, one small step at a time. The pain was still there, but he learned that healing was a process, and it would take time. It was a few months after Toju had begun his journey of healing when he received a letter that would change the course of his life forever. The letter was handwritten, simple, and almost old-fashioned, its envelope worn from being opened and read. It was from the elderly woman who had given him the charm, the one who had spoken of hope and healing when Toju had been at his lowest point. The letter invited him to meet her again. She didn't explain why, but Toju felt a sense of curiosity stir within him. Since that day when she had given him the charm, Toju had started to feel different, something deep inside him had shifted. His grief hadn't disappeared, but there was a small flicker of hope that he hadn't felt in months. The woman's words had given him a glimpse of light in the darkest moments of his life. Toju found himself walking through the town center on the day they had arranged to meet. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow across the fields and rooftops. As he approached the agreed-upon meeting place, an old stone bench under a tall tree, he saw the woman sitting there, waiting for him. She was dressed in the same simple attire as before, but there was something different about her. She seemed even more serene, her face glowing with wisdom and peace. Toju walked up to her slowly, unsure of what to expect. "Toju," she greeted him with a warm smile, "I am glad you came." Toju sat down beside her, his hands nervously fidgeting in his lap. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. The weight of his grief was still heavy in his heart, but there was something in this woman's presence that made him feel calmer, more at peace. The woman looked at him, studying him as if she could see into his soul. "I've been watching you," she said gently. "I see how far you've come, even though you may not realize it. You've taken the first steps on a difficult journey, and I believe you're ready for something more." Toju felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't understand how the woman could say such things when his pain still felt so raw, so all-consuming. "What do you mean?" "I've lost everything," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman turned to him with a soft, knowing expression. "No, Toju. You haven't lost everything. The love you had for your family still lives within you. And that love can help heal not only your heart but the hearts of others who are suffering too." Toju looked at her, confused. "How can I help others? I don't even know how to help myself." The woman smiled kindly. "Because you've walked through the darkness, Toju. You know what it's like to lose everything. You understand the pain that others are going through. Now, it's time for you to share that understanding. You can help others heal, just as you have started to heal yourself. Toju felt a mixture of disbelief and disbelief. How could he, a man who had barely found the strength to live, possibly help others? His heart was still shattered, still raw with grief. But there was something in the woman's words, something in the calmness of her voice, that sparked a tiny flicker of hope inside him. "I don't know if I'm ready," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm still struggling." "You don't have to be fully healed to help others," she said softly. "You just need to share your journey. Healing is not a straight path, Toju. It's a process. And your story can help others understand that they are not alone." Toju thought about this for a long time. He remembered the days when he had been lost in his own grief, when he felt like no one understood the pain he was going through. He wished someone had been there to offer comfort, to tell him that it was okay to feel broken, but that there was hope in the end. "How do I start?" he asked, his voice small but filled with a newfound determination. The woman handed him a small, worn book that had been carefully wrapped in cloth. "This is a guide," she said. "A guide for you to help others who are grieving. I've worked with many people over the years, and I think you can do this too." Toju took the book in his hands, feeling its weight. It wasn't a thick book, but it felt significant. He looked up at the woman, his heart pounding with a mixture of uncertainty and something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. With the book in his hands, and the woman's words in his heart, Toju embarked on a new path. He knew it wouldn't be easy. After all, how could he, a man still scarred by the loss of his loved ones, help others find peace? Yet, deep down, he felt that he had no other choice. He had to try. He started small. Toju began by talking to the people in his community who had also experienced loss, neighbors, friends, and even strangers. He'd sit with them, listen to their stories, and share his own. At first, it felt strange. How could his grief possibly be helpful to someone else? But as he listened to their pain, he realized something profound. People needed someone who understood, someone who wasn't afraid to share their vulnerabilities. He slowly began to put into practice what the book had taught him. He created a safe space for others to express their grief, to cry, to mourn. He didn't have the answers to everything, but he didn't need to. He just needed to be present, to offer comfort, and to show others that healing was possible. As he spent more time helping others, Toju noticed a shift in himself. The constant ache of loss didn't disappear, but it softened. Each person he helped, each story he listened to, brought him closer to a place of peace. He began to understand that his pain was not a burden to be carried alone, but something that could connect him to others in meaningful ways. One day, a woman named Amara came to see Toju. She had lost her husband to a sudden illness, and she was struggling to care for her 3 children. Toju listened to her story, offering her a shoulder to cry on. He shared his own experience, telling her about the grief that had nearly consumed him. "Grief can make you feel like you're drowning," he said, his voice steady. "But you don't have to face it alone. There are people who care, and we can help each other heal." Amara looked at him with tear-filled eyes, but there was a glimmer of something in her expression, hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've given me something I didn't think I could have again. Hope." In that moment, Toju realized that this was why he had to keep going. This was the reason he had to rise above his pain. It wasn't just about his healing anymore, it was about the people he could help, the lives he could touch. Toju's work grew over time. He started a small community group for people grieving the loss of loved ones, offering counseling and support. He began to partner with other local organizations, sharing his story and helping others navigate their own journeys of healing. His life, once filled with darkness and despair, was now filled with purpose and meaning. Toju learned that healing wasn't just about forgetting the past, it was about honoring it. By sharing his pain, he was honoring the memories of his wife, daughters, and mother. Their love had never left him. It was woven into every moment of healing, every step he took toward helping others. Others healed too. Toju's journey wasn't about forgetting his past, it was about learning how to carry it with him as he built a new future.